Scrambling at the White House in a ruling today, a 68-page ruling from District Judge Richard Leone, in which he says that the bulk collection from the NSA of American phone records appears to be in conflict with the U.S. Fourth Amendment, the Constitution. Plaintiffs have a very significant expectation of privacy. The NSA's bulk telephony metadata program significantly intrudes on that expectation. I have serious doubts that the efficacy of the metadata collection program as a means of conducting time-sensitive investigations in cases involving imminent threats of terrorism. Reaction all over Capitol Hill. Senator Wyden, a Democrat, saying Judge Leone's ruling hits the nail on the head. It makes clear that bulk phone records collection is intrusive digital surveillance and not simply inoffensive data collection, as some have said. So we're waiting to see what happens with this. Let's bring in our panel on this first segment. We welcome Katie Pavlich, news editor of townhall.com, Kirsten Powers, columnist for the Daily Beast, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Okay, Katie, seems like a big ruling today. The White House was kind of playing out how this was going to play, and it seems like everyone was waiting to see how this is going to play into the big picture with the NSA.
Right, and with the ruling, it'll be interesting to see. We had calls to end the NSA, and I think that with this ruling, it's not necessarily going to be do we end it completely, but more of tailoring it and issuing probable cause. This really comes down to search and seizure and whether the NSA is going to have to issue search warrants to people that they're looking into, rather than doing this broad approach of putting everyone in the same bucket and then trying to search through it to find what they're looking for.
Kirsten, there were already efforts to reform the NSA. It comes after this big 60 Minutes piece last night. And Capitol Hill, there were a number of different efforts. The administration was looking at things, but there's been pushback saying you can't do that if you're going to risk national security.
Well, you can't violate the Constitution. You can't use national security as an excuse to violate the Constitution. And what this judge is saying is that this is a violation of the Constitution. You have a reasonable expectation of privacy, that the government is not keeping track, storing information about phone calls that you make. And I think that this is a major blow to the administration's argument. It's a vindication of Edward Snowden, who was called a traitor. We wouldn't even know this, of course, if it had not been for Edward Snowden.
Speaking of that, Edward Snowden's statement, he says, I acted on my belief that the NSA's mass surveillance programs would not withstand a constitutional challenge, and that the American public deserved a chance to see these issues determined by open courts. Today, a secret program authored by that secret court was, when exposed to the light of day, found to violate Americans' rights. It's the first of many. Charles.
Look, let's not jump ahead of ourselves. It isn't as if he made yet a constitutional ruling. He issued an injunction against the collection of the data, but then he stayed the injunction so that the administration, the government, has an opportunity to present a case, because national security here is at stake. So he said if the issue came to him, as it will in time, he is inclined to rule that it's unconstitutional, but it's not a ruling yet. Second, he's only one judge. We have no idea how this would end up in the Supreme Court's the beginning of a process. Third, the administration and the previous one had acted under the last Supreme Court ruling on this issue, the Smith case of 1979, in which it said there is no reasonable expectation of privacy in the case of the metadata on phones. So it was acting within the current understanding of the Constitution. What Leone is arguing is that the use of the phone, the way that this information is more detailed today, is different than it was in the 70s, and thus it's in evasion of the Fourth Amendment. But that issue is as yet undetermined, and there is no definitive ruling yet. So it isn't as if Snowden is vindicated. He's not exactly a constitutional lawyer. And if he was interested in this, he would have leaked only this instead of taken everything that he has into Russia and China and kept it from the authorities.
That's an important point. Judge Leone's ruling is stayed right now pending appeal. You have something to say about Snowden?
Well, he may not be a constitutional lawyer, but there are constitutional lawyers like the ACLU, for example, who do believe that this is the correct ruling. So I think that, while it's true that he has stated in light of the fact that this involves national security issues, he's pretty clear in his reasoning that he makes a pretty good case, I think, that this is unconstitutional and that the case they rely on is completely outdated.
We're going to continue to follow this. Meantime, Katie, there is all of this talk about whether Snowden should be given essentially asylum and welcome back here because he has all of these records and that he's a threat to national security and he should be given a deal.
I think that ship has sailed. He's been to multiple countries. He's in Russia now. If you think that the Russians aren't asking him for more information, he's been there for, 6 months. I think that ship sailed a long time ago. This was something that they weren't going to do immediately to get that information back. If they were going to do it, they would have done it at the beginning. It's not going to happen.
Next up, New Hampshire Republican Senator Kelly Ayotte takes our center seat when we come back. We are back with our panel and joined in our center seat by New Hampshire Republican Senator Kelly Ayotte. Senator, thanks for joining us. We know you're in between votes, so we appreciate the time.
Great to be here, Bret.
So as it stands now, you're ready for this vote tomorrow on cloture on the budget. Where are you on this and how will you vote?
Well, I appreciate the bipartisan work that was done by Congressman Ryan and Patty Murray, but here's the issue. There's a provision in this that I think needs to be changed, and that is that we're taking it from the backs of our military retirees to pay for more federal spending. And this provision basically takes $6 billion from the retirement of our military retirees, the COLA that they received, and they're the only group that gets hit directly in this. The changes for the federal employees, those are prospective for new hires. And so I think that you think about it, a man or woman right now serving in Afghanistan, probably on their 3rd tour, could be more tour than that. They may have served in Iraq as well, 19 years in. And the message we're sending them right now is that you, of all people in this agreement, will be singled out and that you will receive less. I think that's wrong. I've introduced an amendment for another pay-for that I think is much more responsible. So we'll save the same amount of money, but we don't have to take it from our military.
Senator McCain has said that he thinks that Senator Levin has assured him that this issue will be taken up in next year's authorization bill, and it doesn't kick in until 2015. So that's good enough for him. He thinks if you have to deal with it now, that it starts to unravel everything else. That's not good enough for you.
It's not good enough for me because, truthfully, in Washington, we'll review it. Where does that get you? What does that say to the military retirees? I don't think it solves it for them. And too many things in Washington go under review and never get fixed, and it never gets addressed. So I don't think $6 billion is a deal breaker, by the way. I've already introduced 2 amendments today on other way to save money. Think about it. Do you know over the 10-year window we're going to spend, according to CBO, $47 trillion? We can't find $6 billion in waste, fraud, and abuse or something else in the government than to take it from our military retirees. I think that's absurd.
Katie.
Senator, there's been a lot of talk about this $60 billion, this money being paid back in, say, 10 years, right? But you've also mentioned that there are tons of duplicate programs. The Government Accountability Office shows that there's $250 billion a year in wasteful spending. Can you elaborate on whether Washington is ever going to take that and get rid of some of these programs that are duplicative instead of taking it off of the backs of the military?
Well, I think that's another really good point. Since I've been in the Senate, I voted repeatedly to implement the actual GAO reports. I'm a co-sponsor of legislation to require the president to make recommendations and Congress to vote on the GAO reports. Tons of duplication, fraud, abuse, and we haven't implemented any of that. And here we are, let's take from the military retirees on a deal, by the way, that doesn't deal with the underlying drivers of our debt, but somehow is singling out this particular group of people who have sacrificed the most for us.
Kirsten.
So the debt limit's going to hit again in a couple months, and Paul Ryan has said that the Republicans are probably going to want to extract something for this. What do you think it's going to be?
It's hard to know. You've got if this agreement passes, it's a 2-year budget agreement. So I don't know what the Republicans will extract from it with the 2 years set in place. I do hope that we focus on the underlying drivers of our debt. Really looking at reforming programs that are going bankrupt. making sure that we can set our country on a stronger fiscal path. Those issues aren't addressed in this agreement. So I'm not clear yet what the House will put forward, but it has to be something connected to our debt. I mean, at times they've talked about unrelated provisions, but the thing about the debt ceiling, you wouldn't want to increase the credit limit on your credit card without dealing with the underlying problem if you're an individual. And I think that's the key for Republicans, is to keep it on topic.
Charles?
Let me switch to sanctions on Iran. I know you support the bill. Will it pass the Senate? How many Democrats will you get to oppose the administration?
Well, I think that basically what we're going to see now is there's a lot of concern about this so-called interim agreement with Iran. They don't have to dismantle any centrifuges. The plutonium reactor is not dismantled. There's so many concerns. We will see another round of sanctions proposed on a bipartisan basis that basically says to the administration, if they don't follow through with real measurable results, as they are supposedly saying to the administration, then another round of sanctions will be imposed by the Congress automatically.
Will it kick in automatically without allowing the president a waiver?
It will be kicking in automatically. I think that the legislation that I have seen so far does have a waiver provision in order to get Democratic support. I agree with you, Charles. I think there's going to be some strong certification provisions, but I agree with you. I'd like to see no waivers. Here's the thing. We've been in a position right now where the administration has been saying, I think, too much. Don't impose additional sanctions because this may cause Iran to back off. I take a very different view. My view is that if Iran is serious, why should they care about prospective sanctions? Because they won't have to worry about them if they're serious.
But if you're serious to want to impose the sanctions, if Iran is unresponsive, we know the president will waive it if he has a chance. So why don't you stick to an automatic kick-in?
I am happy to vote for an automatic kick-in. I would introduce legislation tomorrow to do that, and so would many of my colleagues. We're not on the other side of the aisle getting the support for that, unfortunately. However, I will tell you this. I think they'll be very, very strong, the requirements that the president will have to meet, at least.
But why not expose the Schumers of the world? Introduce it without that waiver, which is an escape hatch.
Well, I agree with you. I think that the waiver provision has been used too much from the administration. So. All
right, I beat that horse.
I mean, you did beat it.
The 5 follow-ups from Charles is pretty good, Senator. I want to ask you this because we get it all the time. Is the Benghazi story going to continue? Is the investigation going to continue? Is it going to lead to some kind of independent panel? Or do you think that it's run its course in your mind?
Well, it hasn't run its course because we still haven't gotten answers.
No, I understand, but I mean, is it on Capitol Hill? Is the impetus still there? Is somebody blocking it? We get all these questions all the time.
I think, you know, the Republicans are in charge of the House. They can have a select committee on this issue.
So why aren't they?
That they haven't had. I've certainly urged the leadership in the House to do it, and if we were in the position in the Senate where we had the majority, I can assure you we will do it, because there are enough of us that say this has to be looked at, and it can't be looked at in this piecemeal fashion, because the administration has, again, been able to sort of not, we'll answer you here, but we won't answer you over here, and what we say here contradicts here. And I think we have to look at the big picture here to get to the truth of what happened in Benghazi. But I've been disappointed that the House hasn't had a select committee, and in the Senate, we've pushed as hard and will continue to push with any means that we can, but obviously the House having the majority right now for the Republicans, I'd like to see them do the select committee.
Does the budget pass tomorrow? Does it get past cloture?
Right now, I'm hearing that there may be enough votes for cloture, but it's not, obviously they haven't been fully identified yet.
Close?
But it's close, because just when I've seen in which of our colleagues, my colleagues, have come out and said that they'll support cloture, as far as I've seen at least 5 now. And so if all 55 Democrats were to vote for cloture and everyone's present, now everyone's not always present, so it's close.
What about you on cloture?
I'm no. I'm no, because I feel like that this provision I talked to you about earlier can be fixed, and can be fixed with savings that don't take it from the backs of our military and don't single out our military. Understand, the military retirees get hurt on this agreement, where the federal employees, the changes to only go to new hires. So the military didn't get the same protection, and I don't understand why that unfair treatment, given you would think we would treat them the best with what they've done for our country.
Well, Senator, we really appreciate the hustle. We know you're in between votes and you have to get back over there, so thank you for your time.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks.
Okay,
It's great to be on with you.
good one. More with the panel after a quick break.
The Washington Post over the weekend had a long story suggesting that people who used to work for this administration were suggesting that regulations were held back last year because it was an election year. How do you react to that?
OMB works as expeditiously as possible to review rules, but when it comes to complex rules with significant potential impact, we take the time needed to get them right. The administration is committed to a regulatory strategy that maintains a balance between protecting the health, welfare, and safety of Americans and promoting economic growth, job creation, competitiveness, and innovation. Our goal is not to move rules hastily, but to maximize the effectiveness and benefits of the rules we complete.
Jay Carney at the White House with an answer to a pretty detailed Washington Post story over the weekend about regulations being held back on not only health care, but the EPA and others because of the election year. We're back with our panel. Kirsten, what about this?
Well, the story alleged that there were 7 current and former employees who are making this claim. So this is not based off of one person. The fact that Jay Carney really didn't address that, he just read a prepared statement. You know, if the Washington Post story is correct, it's yet another problem with Obamacare, and this is particularly corrupt. And I think that they're going to have to give a better answer than that sort of prepared nonsense.
And frankly, Katie, some of the people testifying up on the Hill on the website side basically said the reason that they couldn't roll it out effectively is because the regulations didn't come out until later.
Right, and the White House is saying that this was purely coincidental, that these regulations weren't pushed through until after the election, and we've heard that line before, whether it's with the website or anything else. And the problem here is that, again, you know, with the election, of course, they didn't want to give Mitt Romney any more ammo on the regulation part as they needed to, because he, of course, was running on this idea that the Obama administration has been over-regulating and stifling business. But this, again, shows that they're being a little bit dishonest when it comes to why these regulations were pushed back, to constantly be saying that it's coincidental that all of these things happened right after the election. You maybe can use that once or twice, but it's not going to add up when you continue to use it for everything that comes out after the election.
Charles?
Translation of that word salad that we heard from Jay Carney. You got me, what can I say? I mean, this is obvious that when you have 7 people who say explicitly that this had to do with the election, the administration was manipulating the process. But it isn't only in regulation. Look at how it used the election day as a fulcrum for all of its actions in 2012. You had the debt ceiling fight of a year earlier, where Obama said, I'll only go for a long-term one. And by an incredible coincidence, a long-term meant that the debt ceiling would hold until after Election Day in 2012. You also had this strange decision by Obama to conclude the fighting in Afghanistan in that year before Election Day, in the middle of the fighting season, where everybody understood the logical thing to do is either before or after, which would end up in the winter. And you also had the arguments about the Benghazi investigation. Another amazing coincidence, the internal report was released after Election Day. This administration that was purely political, and the worst element of it was Obama campaigning and saying repeatedly against the Republicans in 2012, these guys, the Republicans, the GOP, care only about the next election and not about the next generation, at a time when his administration was manipulating the regulations in Obamacare in a way that actually hurt the rollout of Obamacare. Condign punishment, I would say.
Kirsten, what about this this field hearing that Republican Chairman Darrell Issa held about the navigators, their weak background checks, and possibly also exposing personal information?
Well, first I would say I think that Darrell Issa should just stick to the problem, which is Obamacare, where you've got pretty much the whole country on your side, and stop going back to ACORN and these other things. That's just a tactical issue. But look, it just seems that every aspect of Obamacare, there just seems to be rifled with incompetence. You know, it's just, there doesn't seem to be anything that's been done correctly. And I think the idea that, are we even surprised, I guess is the question. Are we surprised that the navigators don't have good background checks? It's just, it seems that every component of this has not been done correctly, and the administration needs to account for that. They need to explain why this happened, how this happened, and some people need to be held accountable for it.
The White House says it's one more data point in the Republican obsession with sabotaging Obamacare.
I would say that when you have the Health and Human Services Secretary under President Obama saying under oath in front of Congress that some of these navigators could be convicted felons, that's something that should be taken seriously, and we should talk about that. In addition to that, we've seen undercover video showing that navigators were encouraging people to lie on their application forms so they could get a bigger subsidy. So there is evidence to show that these navigators maybe shouldn't be trusted, and that your personal information shouldn't be given to complete strangers who aren't going through background checks.
That is it for the panel, but stay tuned to see the latest foreign leader snap a picture with President Obama, plus the SR Bing Pulse highlights.